Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Hard Sell. I'm your host, as always, Joel Stevenson. And every now and then, in addition to hosting the Hard Sell, I go on some other podcasts, I guess, for people that don't particularly care about their podcast ratings and want to have me on. But I meet interesting people there, and sometimes the conversation sort of, it bears extending. And this week's guest is an example of that. Connie Whitman's worked with business owners, salespeople, sales teams, organizations to try to help them figure out what can you do what decisions can you make to lead to strong sales results. Her podcast that I was on is called Changing the Sales Game, and she's the author of ESP, the Easy Sales Process. Connie, welcome to the Hard Sell.
Thanks for having me on, Joel. Yeah, we had a really good conversation on my show.
Well, maybe for folks that maybe haven't checked out that episode yet, just give us a little bit of a thumbnail of your background, and then I've got some other questions for you too.
Sure. So I've been in financial sales, predominantly financial sales, or in that industry for 40 years, and 22 of them have been in business. And so what I've learned through my career, and then when I started my business, I was really good at communicating, and I was successful in sales because I'm organized, right? I'm good at communication. And I had a process, which you don't realize until you start a business. And then you sit there and think, well, what am I going to teach? And I thought, I better figure out, why am I successful? And that's how my business got started. I realized that I was good at teaching people how to get more comfortable with sales. And for me, Joel, sales really is about love, care, and respect. And I know people hear the word love and they go, love and sales. What? Who is this chick? If you're not coming from that perspective, to me, that's the ick factor. And that's just not okay. There's no need for it, because we have to learn how to play that long game and build these dynamic relationships that keep on giving. That's how we make more money easily and be able to serve bigger by using these processes. So that's kind of my background.
And I'm curious on the book, is that something where you sort of felt you had a book in you, and then sort of that sort of came at the same time as the business? Or like, talk to us a little bit more about like that actual process of putting your ideas down on paper.
I always wanted to write a book, Joel, but I always, what am I going to write about? What do I have to say, right? That negative self-talk, we all have it. And then I remember my kids were little, and I was in business for several years, and I thought, wow, this process, people are really liking the process. They're understanding it. They're digesting it. And my corporate clients, we were moving the needle. We were seeing a return on investment. So it wasn't just Connie's program worked for Connie. It was all of a sudden I had these corporations who were really relevant and growing their sales. So I thought I should write a book. So I sat down. And of course, I don't know, the listeners have kids, but, having little kids and running a business and a home, blah, 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 there was no time. So I shelved it. And then when COVID hit, the world stopped. So did my business. I had done everything live prior to COVID. So I thought, oh, what a great opportunity. I had this book. Let me dust it off. And then I was off to the races, found somebody to publish it, editors, all those kinds of things. That was an education in itself too, Joel. Talk about not knowing what you don't know. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's a whole art to either self-publishing or publishing a book. There's a lot to it. I'm thinking about doing that in the coming year. So I'm gonna have to ask you some advice on that, on that part of it. But that's interesting. So maybe tell us a little bit more about, easy sales process. That certainly sounds appealing. It's sort of, and it's interesting to have you on the hard sell. It's sort of like we're butting heads with opposite descriptions of the selling process here. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about how this process works and what makes it successful for folks.
It was interesting. When I started in sales, I didn't even know I was selling, because what I was doing was I worked for a credit company and I was dealing with car dealerships. And so I was educating them on, I saw mistakes that they were making in the contracts and stuff like that. So I'm not shy. I would pick up the phone and say, hey, listen, you could do better by the client by doing this. And this is what I would say. And to me, it was educating. And then a sales position came open, and I was in my 20s. Like, what did I know? And all these guys are calling me going, you're going to apply. And Joel, I was like, why would I apply for a sales position? I don't know anything about sales, which struck them very funny, because they said, do you know how much money we're making because of what you've been teaching us? So for me, sales was intuitive, I think, because I approach sales as if I educate someone so they understand what their options are. Now they have clarity, and now I know better, right? With clarity, people make decisions. And then, so then again, after the 20, my 20 years in corporate, when I started my business, when I sat down, it was I called it the easy sales process, but I have 7 steps. Now, do you want me to go through the 7?
Yeah, let's go through them quickly. Sure.
Okay, sure, I'll do it very quickly. Step 1 is preparation, which is probably about 50% of our effort, by the way. So preparation, then it's building rapport, and I have a communication style assessment to help quickly fast forward that building rapport piece. Next one is questions. Imagine that. Tethered to the questions is step 4, which is listening skills. And in my world, we should be listening about 70% of the time when we're with a client or a potential client. Step number 5 is coming up or presenting the solution, right? What the right alternatives or a package of products are. Step 6, ask for the business. And step 7 is the follow-up. It's just very logical progression, but we have to do that I call it my Connie Whitman sales loops over and over and over again. So it's a system that's rinse and repeatable. And because I've been doing it for 40 years, the sucker works, right? But we got to keep it simple.
Yeah. There's a bunch of things we could talk about there. One that might be interesting, I think for some of our listeners are running sales teams, and often they have younger salespeople, and you sort of hear this. Maybe because we're older, it's like every generation has their issues, but it's like, this younger generation is more text heavy, they sort of communicate in emojis. And so we've now got sort of these new salespeople, and we sort of grew up in a world where it's like, well, you pick up the phone and you call somebody, or you physically show up for appointments. Like I remember, my first, I had a physical geography, and I used to have to like go visit everybody. And it's like, if you had to wear a suit on days you were visiting customers. And so if you showed up too many days without a suit on, like you got in trouble, like all these things I think are just like, sound so crazy these days. But what do you have any thoughts or advice about, for folks that are newer to this and might be working with older prospects or customers? Like what are some ways that they can kind of work on some of those rapport or just, kind of verbal, communication aspects?
So it's interesting. Every client I work with, they have to use some form or type of communication model. So DISC, Myers-Briggs, predictive index, whatever people are using. I don't say, oh no, you have to use mine, because if you're already using something, people are used to it. But now let's leverage it. Because if I can understand how I communicate, what my superpowers are and what my blind spots are, wow, that's pretty powerful. And then once I get really good at that, then I ask, especially the young people, start to identify your peers, your family, and really start to play with this in a safe environment, even to the point where you say to someone, hey, listen, like I have a communication style assessment. We could share it if you want. I could give you that link. It's free, so everybody can take it. You get 2 reports. 1, your superpowers, 1, your blind spots. But what I find is when you start to give the tool to the younger generation, and it's technology based, DISC, Myers-Briggs, all of them, right? It's an assessment. They love it. And then they dig in and think, oh, this is like me. And oh, that's my mom. And oh, that's my dad. And then we say, okay, let's add a layer now. When you're in front of a client like that who communicates opposite of you, what do you need to do? And let's strategize. Let's talk about that. So you're teaching them from their I try to build on strength all the time. So once they understand what they're really good at and you identify their blind spots, now they're like, oh, I do that. So, well, let's talk about how to stop doing that and leverage the strength. And now they have something to play with because it's a tangible tool. So I find that really works well. It was cute. I taught a class at one of my clients. It was a business development class. We were talking about leveraging LinkedIn, and they were like, oh, we only use LinkedIn to get a job. I'm like, the party's changed. Yeah. So let's talk about how can we use that to remain relevant without being a pushy jerk, but showing, hey, I'm a thought leader. I know my stuff. Let's really make you spotlight yourself as an expert, thought leader, whatever word phraseology you want to use. They were loving it because, again, it's that technology. So I think as soon as we can educate and combine, they're all in. I love working with the younger generation. I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'll just do a little self-plug here. There's an earlier episode of Hard Sell with Mike Zani, who's the CEO of Predictive Index and a friend of mine, which is pretty interesting to listen to. And I think you're right about this, that I mean, some salespeople might, the old thing, I feel like they used to tell us is like, oh, like walk into the person's office and see if they've got a diploma from somewhere and just, make some small talk on the diploma or something like that. But I think what you're talking about is sort of a next level of proficiency of like actually understanding your style and their style. And like, how do you in that moment bring those styles together to facilitate a conversation?
By the way, I love predictive index. One of my clients in New Hampshire, we use that. And so I'm not certified in that. I'm certified in DISC and I have my own model. And they taught me and I loved predictive index. So anybody that is using it, there's so many reports that predictive index provides. So if you're coaching your team, there's an overlay report that they share about the individual and your style and how can you coach that person more effectively. So these tools are out there. The technology is there. Now we have to learn how to use it, right?
Right.
Like anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. And so, and do you find that, folks that do that, does that I imagine that then carries through in sort of the questioning process. So it's like once you kind of understand, kind of how to build rapport, and then you understand like you're probably going to be better at asking questions.
And I think when you get comfortable with your style and you get, because it's a hard skill to be able to, they call it flex, pivot. I call it modify. For me to modify to my energy, my speech pattern, the pace of my speech, all of those things with who's in front of me, because I need my message to land for them. It doesn't matter how I want to receive it, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as I could get really good at that, the questioning piece, you're already pacing. So then the questioning piece, you're in a position to know, okay, this person is a more formal on the predictive index side. So I need to ask maybe more questions and I need to pause and breathe and allow them time to think to respond. Or I'm a maverick in predictive index. You ask me a question, I'm firing away, right?
Yeah, right.
So who's in front of me? And then we have to allow that space. So yes, the questions, we get into a rhythm with that particular client. It all goes together, Joel. It really all goes together.
And then as you kind of, round out your process with asking for the order, I mean, I find that that's another one where, some people maybe comes a little bit naturally too, but I think for many folks, like asking for the order is a very difficult part of the sales process, at least initially. And like, do you have any thoughts about, how can you help somebody go from not doing that to having that to sort of be a regular part of their routine, and then not feeling like they're being a jerk, or like, the old rolling pen close that, they used to tell us about back in the day.
I'll tell you, a lot of the old things I learned quickly that they don't work. So
yeah,
right. It was intuitive for me. Thank goodness, right? It was a natural skill. So here's the answer to that. That's the sixth step, is asking for the business, or you say asking for the order. For me, that's the easiest step, because if you can get really good at the flow from step 1 and through step 5, and there's a lot of sub skills under each of them, obviously, but if I can get really good at every one of those steps and all the sub skills beneath, when you get to the point where you're going to ask for the business, 3 things should happen. One is the customer's leaning in like, holy moly, where have you been my whole life? Like, we need to do this yesterday. So everybody's on board. It's a perfect fit. Let's just do it. Obvious, right? Second one is, I'll say to my client, you are not ready for me. You're working on this. You have this project. So I could come in and can I help you? Sure, I can. Are you going to put the time in to learn what I'm teaching you? No, you're not. So let's pause. Finish this, finish that. Let me talk to your marketing department. I could start to help you build the culture, right, from the outside. And then when we get in, now we have the culture, the container, we've organized that. Now we can get into the meat. So a lot of times I say, you're not ready for me. That doesn't mean I let them off the hook. They're still in my pipeline, right? I'm still talking to them, but you're not ready for me. That one, it makes me laugh because people go, no. I want to hire. I go, I understand. And yes, I'm a good fit. And yes, I can help you. You're not ready. Trust me on this. You're going to waste time and money. That's not cool in my world. So that's the second one. And then the third one is, I'm not the right person for you. You need to talk to my friend Joel. He's really the one, what you're looking for. He's really the solution. That's the perfect fit. Notice I didn't say objection was one of my one of my three. Because if you do 1 through 5, you're not asking for the business, you're asking for an introduction to the CPA or the introduction to the CFO, or you're introducing someone else who needs to be part of the mix, right? So again, we should not be getting objections, and you should be closing about 80% of your ideal client. So that's another whole conversation. Or, are we getting people in front of us that we can actually help? That's in our industry or expertise, whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you mentioned industry. We get people from, that have come from all different types of sales backgrounds on the show. And I always like to ask, what's sort of, if there's anything that's peculiar about some of the industries that you mentioned, you've sort of come from financial sales and working in that, like, is there anything that you feel like, well, there's this thing in when you're selling financial products to companies that is different, or like when you're working with a CFO that might be different if you're selling into some different buying center? Anything come to mind as sort of unique about the financial space?
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's a great question. So with financial sales, they're really intangibles. So we have to, through our the way we talk to the client and share the information, they have to picture using it in their life, right? Because it's really not, you can't touch a mortgage, you can't touch a checking account, whatever. So if I can help the person visualize using me, my product, and my organization, they're buying in, and they become a lifelong client, and then hopefully we'll send you referrals equally. Tangible sales is a little different, because you can put on like a little dog and pony show, because I could say, let me show you if you hit this button, or let me show you how to use Zoom. It's more tangible. So you have the visual with you, which makes it a little easier. Where in financial sales, it's all about how we describe, how efficient we are about talking about and what's in it for me, right? The benefit to me becomes exponentially important because I can't see it firsthand.
Yeah, it's in software sales. There's in almost every sales process I've ever seen, demo is almost always one of the steps. So that's interesting. Yeah, it makes sense that like you wouldn't demo a mortgage-backed security or something like that.
Yeah, it'd be weird.
It would be.
Let me show you the contract, right?
Yeah, right.
90 pages, and we need your blood type and your first child, by the way,
Yeah, exactly. What about, like, as you think about, so you've been working on this business for a while. You've taught a bunch of teams. What do you see, kind of these days as some of the things that might be, particular challenges for sales teams that you're working with folks that might be a little bit different than what we might have seen, maybe during COVID or pre-COVID?
I'll tell you, the listening skills, I think, have become so exponentially important because humans have a 6-second attention span. So we're constantly checking out, and we're not remaining present with the conversation. And that's dangerous, because as our client is giving us their situation, what the problem is, we're not digging deep enough, because we'll ask our question, we're not listening. And listening for me is when you ask a follow-up question, like you did with me. You've asked me a couple of follow-up. You didn't know what I was going to say. But if we ask those follow-up questions, that's where the magic happens, not with the prepared. You have to go with prepared questions. Don't get me wrong, right? Preparation is 50% of our success, but you have to go with those prepared questions. But based on what the client's saying, you have to really be present, really listening and saying, ooh, you just said something really important. I need more information with that. And the deeper we dig, go the mile deep versus the mile wide, my solution is so spot on that they're like, where have you been my whole life?
Yeah.
So questioning, listening, the 6-second attention span has become a real issue.
Yeah, what with TikTok and social media scroll, I mean, all that stuff is very difficult. I mean, I would say this is something I've struggled with over time. The only thing that's helped me, I think, in a meaningful way has been sitting meditation, which has helped me like really be a little bit more present in the moment, and it's helped all that listening, communication, all that stuff. But you're right, it's critical. It's just like you often don't get to the most important things that you need to learn about someone's, issues or buying process until you get a few levels down. And if you're not paying attention, good luck with that.
And there's layers to that, right? I said you should have an 80% close ratio. Well, you should. If you go deep enough, it becomes so obvious to you that and only if your solution is the perfect fit. But the other thing it allows us to do is, instead of going in with a preconceived notion of, I need to sell this, whatever this is for you in your industry, Now, when I dig deeper, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, not only do they need that, but they need these 3 other subordinate things to really move the needle and give them what they need. So I see all the time salespeople leave money on the table because they're going in with a partial solution. And then that's why they're getting objections or the no's, because it's not really a complete solution. And the person kind of knows that. So when we dig that deep, now we're providing the full solution. You're going to get more yeses. It becomes this whole ripple effect.
And it sounds like that's part of, creating this, maybe approaching this from a place of abundance versus scarcity. I mean, you sort of mentioned this notion of like, one of your 3 things is like, hey, I'm not the right person for you. And I think that is difficult for many salespeople. It's like, well, why would I ever give this thing up? Like, I don't have enough in my, like, I'm, getting pressure about my pipeline isn't big enough, not making my numbers. Like, how could I possibly give a thing up? But it sounds like that, if you've done the earlier steps, you actually should be in a position where like, that's maybe not a hard thing to say to somebody.
No, because you'll get more, remember 80% close ratio. So you're just so much more efficient at getting your pipeline full. And the other thing, and see, people don't believe it until they see it, but do I have time to share a really quick story?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I had a client in Rhode Island. I was introduced to, most of my business is through referrals. So I was introduced to the CEO, come in, very small bank. And at the end, could I help him? Oh my gosh. And I loved him. He and I were like 2 peas in a pod. Like we would have created magic. But I said to him, I'm too expensive. It's not worth you bringing me in. The return on the investment, it's too long. He had hired a young man in marketing who was brilliant. And I said, let me coach him and we'll create meetings and I'll give him stuff and teach him. And I think it'll be a little slower process, but it'll be more cost effective and we'll be able to dig deeper faster. And he was like, oh, I really want to hire you. I said, I'm not, it's too expensive. I go, listen, I can't do it. I feel like I'm ripping you off. So net, we did that. And it would have been a $20,000 contract, maybe, right? It was small because it was a tiny little bank. I said that. I worked with his young man, right? We made some magic. He gave me 3 referrals, which were well over a 6-figure. Between the 3 of them, I made well over 6 figures on him. Now, did I do that to get the 6 figures from him? No, I didn't, because it was the right thing to do. And in my heart of hearts, I want to serve, right? The repercussion, the ripple effect back to me has always been exponentially. You got to give before you get. And the more you give, the more you get. It's just the law of reciprocity out there, people. It works.
Sales karma. It is a thing. So, well, Connie, I'm sure we could sit here all day talking about this stuff as we've done, but we're going to wrap it up here. So if folks want to learn more about what you're doing, want to get the book, etc., what are some ways to get in touch and do that?
Easiest way, go to changingthesalesgame.com. Everything's there. My book is there. My communication style assessment's there. With that said, though, Joel, I'll send you the link. I have a PDF version of the book, which is cheaper than Amazon, but of course you could get it on Amazon. But I'll send you those links, and then everybody can investigate depending on what they want. Connect that way. The other thing on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. If they want to join me on LinkedIn, I do post my shows. I have 2 shows, Changing the Sales Game and Enlightenment of Change, my podcast, and that's all there as well. And that's also on the website. So changingthesalesgame.com, you'll find me.
Yeah, that's great. We'll post that in the notes. Cool. So check that out. And Connie, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks so much. I hope everybody learned something. Thanks again.
Okay.